Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
You're listening to the sweet, sensual, serendipitous, and soulful sounds of Nerdery and Murdery.
God, I hate you so much. All right, welcome to episode 57 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Episode 57. I'm Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week's episode. For those of you who may be skipping around and not listening in order, do realize that the Murdery for this episode is a part 2.
Yes.
So if you've not listened to part 1, stop, go back, listen to episode 56. Because this is the part 2 from on the Murdery side for that episode. So definitely you want to go back and listen to that.
Right on. We can wait. Hold on. Let's pause. Okay, they're back.
As fucked up as the story is.
Yes, it is. That's messed up, dude.
No. So without any further ado, Zig, I'll let you take over on the Nerdery side of the house.
Well, awesome. Today, I'm doing the Phantom Menace.
Oh, we're going to do Star Wars.
We're going to do Star Wars.
All right. So, question, are you doing this? Are you doing this in episode order like you're doing Star Trek, or is there a specific reason?
That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing this like I'm doing Star Trek, like I'm doing Doctor Who. I'm doing them in episodic order. So we'll do Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith,
A New Hope.
No.
Oh no! I guess if okay, you're doing them you're doing them in sequential order of time.
Yes, chronological order.
Okay.
Yes. So then it will be Solo, a Star Wars story, and then
Rogue One.
Should be Rogue One, and then A New Hope.
I see. Okay, I'm with you now. So doing it in sequential time order instead of order of release.
Yes.
Okay. For those of you who may live under a rock, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is not the first Star Wars that was ever released. So
no, it was released in 1999.
Yep.
It is a prequel to the original Star Wars. I've got some notes on that. Let me go ahead and run through this first paragraph here, and then we can kind of discuss. So for our listeners who have been listening under a rock, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is a 1999 American epic space opera film written and directed by George Lucas. Produced by Lucasfilms, distributed by 20th Century Fox, and starring Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, Jake Lloyd, Ian McDiarmid, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, Pernilla August, and Frank Oz. It is the fourth film in the Star Wars film series and the first chronological chapter of the Skywalker saga, set 32 years before the original trilogy during the era of the Galactic Republic. The plot follows Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi as they try to protect Queen Padme Amidala of Naboo in hopes of securing a peaceful end to an interplanetary trade dispute. Joined by Anakin Skywalker, a young slave with unusually strong natural powers of the Force, they simultaneously contend with the mysterious return of the Sith. Following the release of Return of the Jedi, Lucas was unmotivated to return to the franchise and continue the story beyond Return of the Jedi. Though the backstory he created on Anakin sparked interest in him to develop a prequel trilogy. After he determined the computer-generated imagery had advanced to the level he wanted for the prequel trilogy's visual effects, Lucas began writing The Phantom Menace in 1993, and production began in 1994. Filming started on June 26, 1997, at locations including Leisden Film Studios and the Tunisian Desert, and ended on September 30th. The film was Lucas's first directorial effort after a 22-year hiatus following the original Star Wars in 1977. In Plastic Galaxies, it's surmised that the expired Kenner deal happened before he went into pre-production.
Mm-hmm.
Plastic Galaxies is a documentary about the Kenner company that made the Star Wars toys. And the supposition was they had such a sweetheart deal with Lucas that he was kind of mad about it, and he didn't go into production until that deal expired.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you had mentioned that this is the first movie in the Skywalker saga. So again, for those who are under a rock or may not know, the Skywalker saga is episodes 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and 7 through 9.
Yes. Well, that's how a saga is supposed to be. You tell the middle part first, then the first part, and then the last part. That's epic style. That's the way you're supposed to tell those stories.
Sure.
The Phantom Menace was released in theaters on May 19th, 1999, almost 16 years after the premiere of Return of the Jedi. The film's premiere was extensively covered by media and was greatly anticipated because of the large cultural following the Star Wars saga had cultivated upon its original release. The Phantom Menace received mixed reviews, while the visual effects, action sequences, musical score, and some performances, particularly those of Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, were praised. Criticism was largely focused on the screenplay, pacing, and characters, particularly Jar Jar Binks.
Oh, sure.
Despite the reception, The Phantom Menace was a box office success and broke numerous box office records during its debut. It grossed more than $924.3 million worldwide during its initial theatrical run, becoming the highest grossing film of 1999.
let's slap some lipstick on a pig here. The reason it was successful is because they slapped the label Star Wars on it. It was a Star Wars movie. We had been so many years without a Star Wars movie, as you said, 16 years. All of us Star Wars fans were just clamoring for something. We were desperate for another Star Wars movie, desperate to be in that world again. And the story itself is not that great. It's one of the, it's probably the weakest, one of the weakest at least. It's in the bottom two of the Skywalker saga.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not great, but it is a part of the story that needed to be told. Because the Galactic Republic in canon, the Galactic Republic had existed for millennia.
I don't know that story needed to be told. I think it could have been done so much better. But I mean, it had its redeeming qualities. The biggest redeeming qualities are the action sequences with the lightsabers were something we had never had before.
No.
They were phenomenal action sequences, and the music, of course, the great John Williams.
Yes.
The music to that. I mean, especially Duel of the Fates is one of my favorite themes. It's probably, I think it's probably second to the Imperial March for me.
It is a great song. Yeah. It's amazing. It's epic. It's sweeping. It's like it's like a score for an opera, or a symphony. Well, it's just beautiful.
I had heard over on Two Geeks and a Microphone that I didn't remember this, that Duel of the Fates was even playing on MTV. It was so popular.
Yes. And the temp track was Carmina Burana.
Right.
Yeah. And you can hear Carmina Burana. I'm probably not saying that right. I'm sorry. In Duel of the Fates, it's in the way that they sing, but don't sing, they're not actually saying anything. It's more mouth music. But it's beautiful.
Well, and another thing that this movie was designed to do is it was designed to make Darth Vader a sympathetic character.
Yes.
Because we get Anakin Skywalker as a child, as a slave child at that. And it was really meant to show the beginnings of this very dark, evil character that we have been given so far.
Yes. The bad guy of the story, as it were.
Right. And it's hard watching that, knowing where he ends up.
Yeah. Well, and some of the promo posters, the picture of him as a little boy standing outside of a little house, and the shadow is Darth Vader. It's like, oh yeah, that hits pretty hard. And I want to say this movie wasn't necessarily bad because of the acting. Jake Lloyd did fine.
No, the acting was completely fine. The bad part, the part that just killed this movie, was Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that some of the dialogue was not great, but George Lucas has never been known for good dialogue.
No, not at all. He can write a story. He can't write dialogue. Yeah,
exactly. George Lucas needs to write outlines. You know that when they you see in the movies, it's like original concept by so-and-so.
Right.
George Lucas needs to be that guy.
Right.
And then come in with, okay, so you pull the shot back this way, you pull the shot back this way. Yeah, the light from behind here. And because George Lucas is very, very technically good. Some of his ideas are brilliant, but yeah, he can't write dialogue.
No. And that definitely hurts here. It hurts.
Because this story needs good dialogue, and it didn't have it.
Right. And it needs less Jar Jar Binks.
I would agree.
A lot less.
Darth Jar Jar. There's a fandom that says that old Jar Jar Binks was was possibly a Sith apprentice as well.
Yeah, I would literally jab myself in the eye with a pencil. No, 1,000 times no.
Yes. It also talks about the idea of loss, this prequel series. But yeah, I would agree. The Phantom Menace was beautiful. It needed something. It needed something that it didn't get. Yeah. It was fine visually. It was fine musically. Shot right, looked right.
It needed better dialogue and less Jar Jar Binks. I mean,
yes.
we've capsulated the biggest problems with it, because if you get to the action, it was actually pretty good. It was actually really good with the lightsaber scenes. I think the good parts that come out of it, like the lightsaber scenes, as I said, and one of the things that I do like about it is you get your first glimpse into exactly what Obi-Wan said in A New Hope, that Anakin was one of the best starfighter pilots, or one of the best pilots in the galaxy. Yeah. And you get to see that from the entirely too long pod racing scene to the space battle scene against the droid ships.
Yep.
You get to see just how amazing of a pilot he is, which is something that continues into the second and third movies as well. Mm-hmm. Is watching what an incredible pilot Anakin is.
He's a great pilot. He's good at building and repairing. He's a smart guy.
That's another thing that I think we could have gotten rid of. I don't think it was a smart idea for him to be C-3PO's creator.
Yeah, because C-3PO finally would have went, I know who that dude is.
Well, he had his mind wiped. We know that.
Yeah.
We know that. But I still think that's a step too far, that C-3PO ends up being a creation of Anakin. That's too far to me.
Yeah. Anthony Daniels has often surmised what C-3PO would think about that. He thinks it would make him shut down. So.
Yeah. I always thought it was crazy that they wiped C-3PO's mind, but they didn't wipe R2-D2's mind. So he knows the whole time throughout the entire.
Yeah. And R2-D2 is telling this to C-3PO, and C-3PO just keeps looking at him like he's crazy.
Right.
Like, there's something wrong with you.
Right.
How dare you say that? That's awful. But that's what happened. You were there. Yeah. It's the thing. If in the first Star Wars movie you could understand what R2-D2 was saying, he would have given the whole story away. First 15 minutes of the film.
Right. The droid army was a little too much.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the droid army was a little too much. It was too much. The droid army was too much clowning.
Yeah.
And the Trade Federation was just too much of a stereotype. But yeah, the droid army was just way too comical, and the Trade Federation was way too stereotypical. It was too much of a stereotype. Yeah. That was a bad part of this as well.
Yeah, the droid army and the Gungans a little bit.
Yes, very much so.
Like he was trying to appeal too much to the kids. His original idea wasn't to appeal to kids. It was just to do a good story.
I'll disagree. I think he was actually trying to appeal to a new generation. I think he was trying to appeal to a new generation of children, because No.
I mean, yeah. So in the Phantom Menace, he was definitely trying to do that. I think in the original A New Hope, he wasn't. He was just trying to tell the story. He was trying to do a Flash Gordon story.
Yeah.
And I think he thought, well, I could really, get some new kids in, and he did. The kids really, really liked the droids and the Jar Jar Binkses and
Well, what I don't think George Lucas anticipated is the original trilogy's children
Mm-hmm.
who loved Star Wars and were Star Wars fanatics. We grew up, and I don't think he realized how much we still loved it and would appreciate a more adult story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like he did originally. Tell the Flash Gordon story. It's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, just tell that story.
So I think it did pander too much to children and not enough to his adult fans who were still fans.
Yes. Yes, but I mean, honestly, Jar Jar Binks and the Droid Army were just not good. Even the children got sick of them after a while.
Sure, everybody got sick of Jar Jar Binks. Everybody got sick of the Droid Army too, because it was too comical and out of place for what Star Wars is.
Yep. Yeah, and you can throw some comedy in there. It's okay. It's all right for a little bit of comedy.
Sure, they had it in Star Wars and A New Hope and Jedi. They had a little bit of comedy, but it was too much. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just being goofy for goofy's sake.
Yes.
And I don't think the movie is necessarily bad. I don't think the movie itself is inherently bad. It is not to the quality of Empire Strikes Back.
No, not even close.
Yeah.
I would agree with you. It's not inherently bad. For me, it was again a chance to step back into the Star Wars world, and there was enough good in here that it didn't just blow me away from Star Wars and go, oh, this is so terrible, I'm never going to watch Star Wars again. Yeah. It reignited a passion from when I was a child, and I love seeing the Jedi, which during this is their prime, mostly in their prime. I love seeing things that we had heard about throughout the years coming into play here. So those parts of it were really, really good. And it's one that I've watched it multiple times. It's not like I watched it once and said, this is so bad I can't watch it again. I've watched it multiple times, but every time the things I hate about it are the things I hate about it.
Yeah. Yes. They don't get better.
No, never.
It's like in some cases, it's like, man, I really, really didn't like that. You go back and watch it with a more, a little more tempered eye. And it's like, that really wasn't that bad. That's actually not a bad idea. I couldn't embrace it at the time. In this case, no, you're right. I've watched it recently. It's not good.
No,
it's still, the parts that are bad are still bad.
Right.
The pod race goes on way too long.
Oh yeah.
But a lot of people criticize the prequel movies as being too political. I don't think so.
It definitely is political.
Yeah, but I don't think it's too political. I think that story needs that because you have, again, a stable galactic republic that has existed for millennia. There's going to be some political shenanigans that took that down, and you have to show that. Okay, maybe not spend hours and hours on senatorial debates, but you have to show that happening because otherwise the story doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I disagree with some folks saying that was because it did show the galactic democratic system collapsing, and gave rise to an empire, and it happened in very short order.
Well, and it was that's kind of the key thing with the Sith rule of two. They're not able to go out and hit a battlefield with all the Jedi and take the Jedi out of the way. Politically was the way to do it. Politically was the way to get rid of the Jedi. And I think eventually they succeeded.
I think if they'd have concentrated a little bit, and again, the Trade Federation, the Nemodians, they didn't bother me as much. I actually liked those Nemodian characters. They were a little one-dimensional, but again, that comes down to dialogue more than anything else. Their story of why they were there made sense. I think if they'd have maybe not concentrated on the comedy of the droid army and the Gungans and spent a little more time with the political wranglings, that film would have been better.
Could be.
Like if they hadn't wasted, how long was that pod race? 32 minutes, something like that?
Yeah, it was really long.
Give me a 5-minute pod race and 20 minutes of how the Galactic Republic died.
Oh, I think you definitely needed more than 5 minutes of the pod race, because that, like I said, that was your first glimpse into seeing just how good of a pilot Anakin was. And I think you needed a somewhat lengthy one to be able to show how he's just able to jump into a starfighter that he's never been in before.
No.
And be such a good pilot. I think you needed a relatively lengthy one, but
yes, but not 32 minutes.
No, that was too much.
Yeah. Well, and then, okay, I am down with them going into the Gungan city and getting the Gungans help to fight the droid army. Why does Jar Jar Binks have to go with them to Tatooine? Why does that have to happen?
Right. Let's leave Jar Jar behind at that point.
Yeah.
I don't know that why that character stayed in for so long is he doesn't really bring anything to the story. He doesn't help accelerate the story along.
No.
Once they find out about the Gungans, we can probably leave him at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. And you pick back up with him when the Gungans are fighting the droid army.
Sure.
And you could still do some of the comedy where he tries to throw the ball and misses and ends up taking out a tank. Keep that in. That's fine.
I don't know. Again, unnecessary.
But you don't have him walking around the desert, which is bad for an amphibian creature, by the way. That bothered me more than anything else. Dude, that dude should be drying out and hurting right now because he wasn't covered. He's an amphibious creature. He's in a very dry desert. Anytime you show any other amphibious creatures in that dry desert, I don't know, say like in The Mandalorian, they're in full suits.
Right. Yeah, when Jar Jar was under exile and he's living out in the forest, at least it's still wet out there.
Exactly.
And he could still get to water. So that's honestly a point I never thought of.
They did do a little bit of background on the Nemodians. I think they're kind of interesting. They were the most visible villains of the film, in the Phantom Menace. According to Star Wars Expanded Universe, Nemodians are descended of Duro colonists that landed on Nemodia in the years of the early years of the Republic. At some point in their development, the Nemodians learned how to domesticate giant beetles, and they began others to do physical labor for them ever since. So by the time of the Phantom Menace, the Nemodians control the galaxy's largest commercial corporation and are head of the powerful Trade Federation. So they're they have been getting other things to do their work for them for so long that's just kind of how their society evolved, which I thought was an interesting point.
Well, and that's another thing with you reading that you really don't get in the Phantom Menace is why the Trade Federation is as powerful as they are.
Yeah.
Why can they just blockade a planet because they want to?
Yeah. The Trade Federation created turmoil in the Galactic Republic by blocking the planet Naboo in protests of recent legislator taxing major galactic trade routes. The Republic's leaders, Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum, dispatched his Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi to negotiate with the Trade Federation's Viceroy, Newt Gunray. And again, I don't fault that actor. He didn't have great dialogue. I thought he did fabulously with what he had. It didn't hurt that makeup that he was in was just kind of cool.
I think we could have done without the accent. I think the accent was a bad part. I think that was a bad part of it too. Well,
and Finis Valorum, okay, we spend that much money to get that actor into that role. He gets 10 minutes, maybe?
Yeah.
And usually he's not saying anything. That's Terrence Stamp.
Right.
Terrence Stamp, the great Zod. You know, we can't give that dude 15 minutes to explain how politics works to somebody. There was a golden opportunity for him to talk to the kid. Look, what actually happens is this. And it would, oh my God, instead of spending, again, 15 minutes of Jar Jar Binks fighting with a suburban. If we hadn't had that, we could have had Chancellor Valorum talking to Anakin about how politics works.
Well, the overarching thing that we're saying here, and we've said it,
Sorry.
is no, it is overall, The Phantom Menace is not that great of a movie. And especially, it is not a great Star Wars movie.
No.
Do I think people need to see it? Yes.
Yeah.
I think you need to see it in order to see the full Skywalker saga.
Mm-hmm.
But we could have had so much better. We could have had so much better from The Phantom Menace.
Yes. Agreed. And honestly, I think they made a lot of course corrections in the second film. Attack of the Clones was great. I loved Attack of the Clones.
Attack of the Clones was good. It was much better, but it again suffered from dialogue. Yeah,
it had poor dialogue. But Jar Jar Binks was there. He was in for a couple of scenes, and it worked. It made sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You didn't have him walking around a desert planet getting into fights with a Gungan.
Sure. Well, and like I said, to me, Phantom Menace is probably my least favorite, but it's definitely in the bottom two.
What's the other one? Jedi?
No. Oh God, no. The Last Jedi.
Oh, the last one?
Uh-huh. No. Yes. The very last one. Yeah. Which was, so I'm trying to remember. It's Force Awakens. Is it The Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker, Last Jedi? Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got such harsh feelings from the last part of the saga that those last two might go down to the bottom too.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so the scene where everybody in the galaxy shows up, with Wedge as the gunner, and I got chills.
There are cool things there, but not enough to put it into my tops. No.
Right on.
No, not at all. Phantom Menace belongs near the bottom or at the bottom, I'm sure. I'd probably have to sit and rethink my whole rating of all 9 of them, but Phantom Menace is easily one of the worst.
Right on. Yeah, I would agree with that. But again, I'd still watch it.
Yeah, I think you need to.
It's and I still do. It's a flawed story, but it's not necessarily a bad story. There were bad choices.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agreed. So again, recapping, I think that what we're both saying is you should watch it, but go into it knowing that it is one of the worst of the... Yeah,
they're all going to get better from this.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Mostly.
It's like first season of Next Gen. Just get through it. It gets better after this.
First season of Next Gen was better than this. So,
well, I think that about wraps it up for the Phantom Menace.
All right, great. Appreciate that ride down that terrible movie.
You're welcome.
With that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
And again, this is part 2 from last week. So you've had your opportunity to stop and go back and listen. So you've been warned as we go into here that this is the second part. As just a quick recap, Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was an American serial killer known as the Kansas City Butcher and the Collector, who kidnapped, raped, tortured, and murdered at least 6 men between 1984 and 1987 in Kansas City, Missouri, after having forced his victims to endure periods of up to 6 weeks of captivity.
6 weeks.
And where we left off, at 1:00 a.m. on March 29, 1988, Berdella abducted his last victim, a 22-year-old male prostitute named Christopher Bryson, whom he lured to his house upon the promise of payment for sex. At Berdella's home, Bryson was knocked unconscious with an iron bar and then bound to Berdella's bed, where he was subjected to similar methods of abuse and torture endured by his previous victims. Although in Bryson's case, Berdella repeatedly swabbed his eyes with ammonia before exclaiming to him, quote, the only things you need to think about are you, me, and this house. After several days, Berdella explained to Bryson he had begun to trust his captive, and although he was willing to discuss aspects of the abuse and torture he was receiving, there would be no negotiations pertaining to his sexual abuse. Berdella finished this discussion with a stern warning, quote, I've gotten this far with other people before and they're dead now because of mistakes they made. On the third day of his capture, Bryson had earned sufficient trust from Berdella to persuade him to establish a daily regime of tying his hands in front of him after his sexual abuse rather than above his head and to the bed, upon the excuse that Berdella's doing so was restricting the circulation to his arms. He also persuaded Berdella to leave a television on within the room with the remote control placed between his legs whenever Berdella was out of the room. However, he would later state to investigators that he had thought almost constantly about escaping. I probably would have too.
Yep.
The following day, he managed to break free of his restraints by burning through them using a book of matches Berdella had inadvertently left in the room and within his reach when he had left the house to go to his place of work. Bryson then managed to escape from the house by jumping from a second-floor window, wearing nothing besides a dog collar around his neck and breaking a bone in his foot in the process.
This is where we came in.
This is exactly where we came in. I found it wild. He broke a bone in his foot, but it said in multiple areas that I had read that he ran towards a meter reader. Can you think about running after breaking a bone in your foot?
Well, I mean, the guy had already told him, hey, I've killed a whole bunch of other people. After what he'd been through, I wouldn't have doubted the dude that he'd done that. I
guess pure adrenaline just kept him going.
Yeah. I got to get out. I got to get out. I got to get safe. I got to get safe. I got to get safe.
The meter reader did lead Bryson to the house where he'd been approaching, whereupon the occupants promptly called the police, who arrived minutes later. Questions at the scene by 4 officers, Bryson initially claimed he had been hitchhiking when abducted by Berdella, who had kidnapped, raped, and tortured him for 4 days before he escaped from jumping from a window on the second floor of the property. Furthermore, this individual had kept him bound to a bed on the second floor of his house throughout much of the time he had been held against his will, repeatedly sodomizing him, drugging him, and injecting his throat with drain cleaner to diminish his ability to speak loudly. As Bryson spoke, the officers also noted that in addition to the dog collar and broken foot, Bryson had red swollen eyes and visible scars and welts across his entire body. 2 officers were told to maintain a discreet surveillance of the property as Bryson was driven to the Menorah Medical Center, accompanied by a 3rd officer for treatment, as the 4th officer radioed the Kansas City Police Department to request a formal search warrant of the property be drafted. Later questioned in greater detail at the Kansas City Police Department, Bryson said he had been held against his will by the occupant of 4315 Charlotte Street, who had subjected him to 4 days of repeated sexual abuse, humiliation, and torture. Bryson also told police that his captor had shown him Polaroid images of men who appeared to be deceased, with the explanation that these had been previous individuals he had unsuccessfully attempted to collect as his sexual slaves. Furthermore, his captor had informed Bryson that he had no intention of ever allowing him to leave the property, and that he had claimed to have killed the previous individuals he had captured and treated in this manner, and that if Bryson became a nuisance or a threat to him, he would either be subjected to greater levels of torture than what he had already endured, or very simply just killed.
Ouch.
On the afternoon of Bryson's escape, Robert Berdella was arrested on charges pertaining to the sexual assault of Christopher Bryson. He declined to allow officers inside his home, which I thought was interesting. You're under arrest, yeah, but you can't go inside my home.
Well, they may have been waiting for the search warrant too.
Which they did. The search warrant they requested earlier was brought. Corroborating Bryson's claims of having been restrained and tortured in the second floor bedroom, investigators discovered the bedroom on the second floor was found to have burnt ropes attached to the posts of the bed. Also in the room was an electrical transformer plugged into a wall with wires leading to the bed. There was a metal tray containing syringes, small bottles apparently containing prescription drugs, swabs, and eye drops were also close to the bed. Also found in the room were a long iron pipe, various lengths of rope, and leather belts. And investigators noted that on the posts of the bed were extremely worn, suggesting that restraints had earlier been used tied to these posts and that the individual or individuals had struggled to free themselves. Searching elsewhere in the home, investigators discovered a human skull in a closet on the second floor of the property and a partially decomposed human head in the backyard. We talked about that in part one. Mm-hmm. Both a hacksaw and a miter saw were discovered in the basement of the property, and a chainsaw was also found to be soiled with bloodstains, flesh, and pubic hair. So he used a chainsaw too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you talked about that in the first one. The first kid he dismembered with a chainsaw.
I'd forgotten. So much of this. Wow. I'd just forgotten about that. Luminol tests later revealed that the floor of Berdella's apartment and 2 plastic trash barrels were extensively bloodstained. They found 334 Polaroid pictures and 34 snapshot prints of various male individuals stowed in various locations within Berdella's house. These pictures showed Christopher Bryson and several other men, both in life and death, and in many of the images had been taken as the subjects were tortured. The search also uncovered numerous restraints and sexual devices, occult literature, a satanic robe, pornographic literature, hypodermic needles, and a book on narcotics. On top of a chest of drawers in one bedroom, the officers discovered a stenographer's pad containing the detailed torture logs he had maintained for each victim, several newspaper clippings from the Kansas City Star regarding a missing young man named Jerry Howell, and both a wallet and driver's license belonging to a missing person named James Ferris was discovered in the closet on the second floor of the property.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Imagine this. He's in the police, he's in the police interrogation room, right? Guy walks in with a box, puts all this stuff out in front of him, and goes, okay.
And of course, I'm sure Berdella says, wasn't me.
Yeah.
Before the search of the Berdella property had concluded, the Kansas City police assembled a special task force of 11 detectives and 1 sergeant to focus exclusively on Berdella's case. This task force extensively researched Berdella's history, discovering that he was a well-known individual among Kansas City male hustlers, having earned a reputation for preying on transient young men. Several of these male prostitutes were also reluctant to accept him as a client, both because of his penchant for drugging, injecting, and torturing his sexual partners and acquaintances, and also because he had long been considered a suspect in the disappearance of 2 men whose personal possessions had been found in his house. This was Jerry Howell and James Ferris. Mm-hmm. Missing person reports had been filed in relation to both these men, and Berdella had been extensively questioned in relation to both the disappearances, but in both instances, he denied having anything to do with them or their disappearance. And despite being considered a prime suspect in both cases and being placed under surveillance, police had been unable to find any solid evidence linking him to either man's disappearance.
Okay, so they were already onto this dude then.
Yeah, they had tried surveilling him, but they couldn't catch him in anything. So I guess the surveillance wasn't very good since he had kept bringing people home. Police had been unable to find any solid evidence linking him to either man's disappearance, as I said. And in both instances, after giving his initial statement to police, Berdella had indignantly refused to talk further without a lawyer present. He would later have his lawyer threaten to file harassment accusations against police unless their questioning and surveillance of him cease. So,
ooh.
Yeah. Oh. James Ferris's wife identified him in several instant photos found at the Berdella property, some taken after her husband's death. Paul Howell formerly identified one picture of a young man hanging upside down in Berdella's basement as depicting his son. Several other Polaroid images depicted as yet unidentified young men, and several detectives were assigned to the task of identifying each individual depicted to determine if he was alive or dead, and if alive, the circumstances surrounding his depiction. As several of these images depicted a section of the body of the individual who had taken the photograph, on April 13th, Berdella was ordered to pose nude for a series of photographs in order that portions of his body could be photographed in the precise angle depicted within these images for comparison with the original Polaroid photographs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. As numerous male names had been scrawled upon various stenographers' pads at Berdella's address, the detectives began attempting to trace each individual. One of these individuals traced, a young man named Freddie Kellogg, was able to state to detectives he and several other young men had intermittently lodged with Berdella since the 1980s, and that Berdella had been in the habit of plying his lodgers with drugs, typically intravenously, before engaging with sex with them, regardless of whether they consented or not. Kellogg also stated Berdella had expressly stated that a condition of his lodging with him was for Kellogg to persuade young men whom Berdella had found attractive to attend parties at Charlotte Street in order that Berdella could drug him. Wonder if Berdella got some of his stuff from Dean Corll.
Oh.
Very similar.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, because that story had been out there, and this is the mid-'80s, so Dean Corll was the late 60s, right?
70s.
Yeah.
Should Berdella ever discover any of these individuals was a police informant, he would use this knowledge as a tool in which he could blackmail the individual to his own advantage. In spite of this condition of his living with Berdella, Kellogg further stated that numerous male prostitutes and addicts had been reluctant to engage in any form of contact with Berdella because of rumors regarding his links to the disappearance of Jerry Howell. In addition to these disclosures, Kellogg was able to name 3 of the individuals depicted in the Polaroids as being Todd Stoops, Robert Sheldon, and Larry Wayne Pearson. The investigators would shortly discover Berdella had paid a $30 fee to secure a bond for Pearson in 1987, and that no further records existed to indicate Pearson was still alive. Nonetheless, investigators did discover that in August of 1987, Berdella had filed an assault report from a hospital room in which he alleged a man named Larry Pearson had deeply bitten his penis during oral sex, causing a serious laceration. An interview with Robert Sheldon's employers at a Kansas City manufacturing plant had confirmed the young man was a reliable employee of theirs and that he suddenly ceased attending work in 1985. Shortly after the search of the Charlotte Street house had concluded, Berdella was informed of the discoveries at this property. The same afternoon, he was ordered to pose for a series of nude photographs for the comparison with Polaroid images. Investigators attempted to conduct their first formal investigation with him, although Berdella simply invoked his right to silence in this setting. Investigators later sought to obtain handwriting samples from Berdella in an effort to prove he had written the notes found within the various stenographers' notepads discovered at his house, but he refused to cooperate and was sentenced to 6 months in jail for contempt of court.
Huh.
Berdella was initially formally charged with 1 count of felonious restraint, 1 count of assault, and 7 counts of forcible sodomy. As investigators continued their investigations into the discovery of his property, Informer compiled further charges against him. He was assigned a temporary public defender as his legal representative and held in protective custody at a Jackson County jail in lieu of a $500,000 bail. In late April, the skull found inside of Berdella's closet was identified via dental x-rays from the University of Kansas Medical Center as that of Robert Sheldon. The same day a dental identification was made upon Sheldon's skull, 2 men separately phoned the Kansas City Police Department to state one of 7 identified young men depicted in a photographic array released to the media on April 27th was a former high school acquaintance of theirs named Mark Wallace. When a detective contacted Wallace's sister, she stated their brother had been missing since mid-1985. Shortly thereafter, investigators discovered that photograph D, released to the media in this same array, was one Larry Wayne Pearson. As Pearson had once been a ward of the court in Wichita, his dental records were discovered and compared with the skull found in Berdella's backyard. So Berdella would formally be charged with the murder by dismemberment of Larry Wayne Pearson in July, after the head was discovered in his backyard and formally identified as Pearson's on May 12th. Prosecutors had gathered sufficient circumstantial evidence to accompany the physical evidence retrieved, and on July 22nd, 1988, a grand jury formally indicted Berdella for the murder of Larry Wayne Pearson. The following month, he was arraigned and pleaded guilty in the Fourth Circuit Court of Jackson County Court before Judge Alvin C. Randall to the first-degree murder of Larry Pearson. The plea was entered following a late morning recess in the arraignment hearing into this particular murder and came as a surprise to both the judge and prosecuting attorneys. The prosecution team assigned to the case accepted the plea, with the assistant prosecutor Pat Hall later explaining this decision as being, quote, in the best interest of our client, the people of the people of the state of Missouri. Following the submission and acceptance of this plea, the judge insisted that Berdella confess under oath as to Pearson's death. And in response to questioning by his attorneys, Berdella stated, quote, I put a plastic bag over his head and tied it with a rope, allowing him to suffocate. When asked if he performed this act deliberately and with malice aforethought, Berdella simply said, yes.
Okay.
He was then sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He would later be placed in protective custody due to concerns for his safety for his other trials. A second guilty plea submitted before the Jackson County Court on August 24th earned Berdella a further life term without parole for one charge of forcible sodomy against Christopher Bryson, 6 counts of sodomy, and 1 charge of assault being dropped as part of a plea bargain. And he would also further receive a term of 7 years pertaining to 1 count of felonious restraint against Bryson on this date.
Good night. They threw him under the jail.
Mm-hmm. Despite initially pleading not guilty to the remaining 5 murders on September 13th, 88, with the agreement of his 2 defense attorneys, Berdella ultimately conducted a plea bargain with the prosecutors to avoid the death penalty in the remaining charges. In this plea bargain, Berdella agreed to confess in graphic detail as to whom he had killed, what indignities he had subjected to each victim, and how he had killed each victim and what he had done with their bodies. These confessions were given to prosecutors between December 13th and 15th, 88, and in return for his cooperation, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty. On December 19th, 88, Berdella formally waived his rights to be tried for any of the outstanding murder charges upon the understanding he was to be convicted on 1 further count of first-degree murder, that of Robert Sheldon, and 4 counts of second-degree murder. He formally pleaded guilty to each of these charges. Members of the public were prohibited from attending this hearing, with only family members of his victims and news reporters permitted to attend the proceedings. And in response to these guilty pleas, Judge Myers imposed 5 further concurrent life sentences, with an additional condition barring any future prospect of parole in the sole case of the first-degree murder in which he pleaded guilty. So he's going away forever.
Yeah.
In his testimony, Berdella did claim that the movie he had seen, The Collector, left a major impression of him. Following the senses of shock and disgust he claimed to have initially experienced after killing his first victim, the movie had resurfaced in his memory and subsequently became a motivating psychological force to which he exhibited against his victim in all the subsequent murders. His victims, he stated to investigators, lost any degree of humanity in his eyes once he had chosen to render captive. Quote, these were not people that I thought of. Once I had them bound and was using them, they became something other than people to me. I never thought it out to the level of what if one of these bodies ever gets loose. In reference to the coded notations within the actual torture logs, Berdella confessed that many of the abbreviated entries were simply shorthand terms for methods of torture he had conflicted upon his victims or his initial observations upon viewing them when he entered the room. The entry CP, for example, referred to the chlorpromazine, I've tripped on that several times, that he had injected into his victims to assist with restraining them, whereas the entry for DC referred to swabbing their eyes with drain cleaner or the injections of the substance into their vocal cords. Entries reading EK or EKG referred to the torture administered to his captives with electrical shocks, whereas several other entries contain the anatomical location where Berdella administered the abuse or torture of his victims. For example, At one point, in relation to victim James Harris, Berdella had written an entry 1 1/2 KET-NK plus shoulder to indicate he had injected 2.2 cubic centimeters of ketamine into his victim's neck or shoulder. Other entries such as gag loose, no resist in retie, or very delayed breathing, snoring were more self-explanatory. Investigators consulted a specialist in toxicology in their investigation into Berdella following his arrest. This individual stated that, judging by the notes he had written about the victim Robert Sheldon, the accumulation of chlorpromazine injected into the victim had been toxic. Furthermore, Berdella confessed to having alternately buried the two victims' heads in his backyard, adding that he retrieved and cleaned the first skull, that of Robert Sheldon, by the time he had buried Larry Pearson's head in the same hall. Sheldon's skull was that which he placed in the closet of the second floor of his property, in an area of the household Berdella referred to as, quote, my gallery area. Berdella removed the teeth from his skull and stowed them inside of envelopes inside the same room, and he further claimed to have intended to retrieve Pearson's skull once sufficient time had elapsed for it to skeletonize, although he was adamant there had been no rational, sinister reason for him doing so. In addition, he vehemently denied media rumors that he had been engaged in any form of Satanism or that he sold sections of his victims' bodies at flea markets booths. Berdella was able to name all of his victims to investigators, although one victim, Mark Wallace, had been seized by opportunity when he had discovered him seeking shelter from a severe thunderstorm in a tool shed. His other 5 victims had been captured after he unsuccessfully tried to steer them away from their general lifestyles, and thus had simply become frustrated at the failures of efforts. That we talked about that earlier, that it seemed to be that that's what was frustrating him the most. On each victim's capture, Berdella described in graphic details the sexual, physical, and emotional abuse to which he had subjected each victim and which he had recorded within his torture logs. He tersely explained his successive actions into investigators on December 14th with the statement that he was, quote, capturing them first, and what developed. Nonetheless, he did claim that he had tried to prevent any of his victims from developing any form of malnutrition or infection by occasionally administering antibiotics or nutrients intravenously as his abuse or torture escalated. We talked about that earlier as well.
Keeping them alive.
Yeah, that he was keeping them alive for further torture. The methods of torture exhibited against his victims had included the administration of high-voltage electric shock, starvation, the application of alkali-based detergents to their throats, vocal cords, or eyes, and the bludgeoning of their hands with the intention of rendering these body parts unusable. One method of torture was the insertion of needles beneath the fingernails, which we talked about earlier. And furthermore, Berdella confessed that the level of abuse he inflicted had increased with each successive victim, and that he had viewed the Polaroid images he had taken of his victims as being a trophy or record of the event.
Wow.
Yeah. Although police extensively searched for the remains of Berdella's victims throughout their initial investigations, the confession Berdella provided to investigators in the autumn of '88 confirmed the dismembered bodies of all 6 victims had been stowed in trash bags and subsequently taken to a landfill. Consequently, their bodies were never recovered.
Chopped up, wrapped in paper, put in trash bags, and then put in another big trash bag.
And then taken to landfill.
Yep.
In the years following his '88 convictions and incarceration, Berdella granted an individual to the Missouri-based television station KCPT and corresponded with numerous individuals. To all concerned, he simply attempted to restore his image as a sensitive citizen who had simply made mistakes in committing his crimes. He further claimed he had been demonized unfairly by the media before, during, and after his arraignment and plea bargain, and that police ineptitude had resulted in him being allowed to remain at liberty following his first murder. I would agree with that. Berdella also lodged several complaints with prison officials regarding prison conditions. He wrote several letters to a local minister, claiming that prison officials knew of his high blood pressure, yet were not providing him with his prescribed heart medication. In 1992, Berdella contacted the counselor whom he had met when he was first incarcerated, the Reverend Roger Coleman, and he informed Coleman of his distress due to staff at the Missouri State Penitentiary withholding his heart medication. At 2 p.m. on October 8, 1992, Berdella complained to prison staff of heart pains and was taken from his cell to the prison infirmary, and medical staff determined his heart was unstable and called for an ambulance. He was taken to a hospital in Columbia, Missouri, where he was pronounced dead from a heart attack at 3:55 p.m. He was 43 years old.
Heart attack. Wow. 43?
Shortly after the judge at his trial, Alvin Randall, was informed of Berdella's death. In response, Randall sarcastically remarked, quote, "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy." According to published reports, although Berdella suffered from a depressive personality disorder, he was also a diagnosed sexual sadist who gained extreme sexual excitement from the humiliation, pain, and torture with which he had subjected his victims. In November of 88, auctions of Berdella's vast collection of artifacts and furniture confiscated from his home were held on 4 separate dates, with the intention that all proceeds raised at the auction would pay for his mounting legal fees within the ongoing legal proceedings. Although many items sold for less than the expected price, by the end of the day's first auctioneering alone, more than $60,000 had been raised for this purpose.
Wow.
And then Berdella's house was purchased by a local businessman for an undisclosed sum in December of 88, and the property was later demolished. And
so some concerned citizen went, "Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and buy this. All right, guys, knock it down.
Level it. Yep. And that's the end of part 2 of the story of Robert Berdella.
Well, thank you, sir.
So I see why. I think you see why I had to do this in 2 parts.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, it was a whole lot.
Detailed, very detailed.
There was a ton of information for me to go off, especially in that the big book of serial killers. There was pages and pages of stuff that I was able to read through for this guy, and such detail of what he did. Of course, he
kept a record.
He kept a record, and then he admitted to everything.
Yeah.
So you don't get that a lot with a lot of these killers, is they don't admit to everything in that great of a detail. So
yeah, well, I understand that a lot of times, even though they know they're caught, they won't admit to stuff because it feels like they still have some sort of power.
Right? No, absolutely. They'll hold back on stuff. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Wow, my mouth is really dry after all that. So that takes us to the end of a recording week. As always, you can find us on nerderyandmurdery.com, where you can find the links to this episode, as well as pictures from our stories. You can find the link to our merchandise, where if you wish to become a logo carrying fan or a card carrying fan of Nerdery and Murdery, you can get our merchandise there.
Yes.
As always, you can also find the link to our Patreon, where if you wish to donate to help keep our show going, you can find the link there. And with that, you do get our episodes 2 weeks early, as well as access to exclusive content that is only available through our Patreon.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. We do, however, put information from our exclusive episodes on the site, so you can at least see that. And
yeah, we got pictures and links and all sorts of stuff.
See what you're missing out on.
Yes.
And also, lastly, as a reminder, please do rate us, give us a rating and a review anywhere you can, especially iTunes and Spotify. It really helps our show. It helps other people find our content, and it's something that you can do that is completely free, that helps us out as a fan of our show, and only takes a couple of minutes. So with that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.